In a world that never stops moving, falling asleep has become more difficult than ever. Our minds are caught in loops of unfinished tasks, regrets, worries, and the constant pressure to do more, to become more, to feel more. We scroll through our phones until our eyes blur, chasing happiness as if it's always just ahead of us. But when the lights go out, the noise in our minds doesn't. If anything, it grows louder. What if you could end your day differently? Not with tension, but with peace, clarity, and the ancient wisdom that has guided humanity through chaos for thousands of years. Philosophy isn't just something to study in classrooms. It's for nights like this, when you're alone with your thoughts and finally ready to listen. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, reminded himself daily, don't be consumed by the opinions of others. Embrace difficulty and return to reason. The words he wrote in Meditations weren't meant for the world. They were meant for himself, to stay grounded amidst the storms. He taught that we don't need to react to everything. We don't have to be ruled by craving, comparison, or fear. To care less is not indifference, it is wisdom. Yet even when we stop chasing others' approval, many fall into another trap, the pursuit of pleasure. We believe the next item, the next experience, or the next achievement will bring us happiness. But pleasure without deeper meaning only leaves us feeling empty. Ancient philosophers warned that the endless chase of pleasure leads not to joy, but to hollowness. True peace comes from mastering oneself, knowing when to let go. And then there's a truth most people avoid, death. Memento Mori, remember you will die. Not to make you sad, but to awaken you. When you remember that time is limited, you stop wasting your energy on what doesn't matter. You stop delaying joy. You stop living on autopilot. Contemplating death isn't gloomy, it's illuminating. It reminds you that you are alive, and that alone is extraordinary. This video is a quiet space, a place to set down what you no longer need, to let philosophical ideas guide you into sleep gently, softening the noise in your mind and reconnecting you with the deepest parts of yourself. Imagine, for a moment, being the most powerful man in the world, the ruler of an empire that stretches across continents. Millions of people live under your authority. Your name is carved into monuments, and your decisions shape the fate of nations. Yet, despite all this power, you feel helpless, not because you lack strength, but because life, in its raw, unpredictable form, keeps throwing storms your way. War breaks out on your borders. Plagues sweep through your cities. Trusted allies turn into enemies. Loved ones fall ill and die. This was the life of Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, and perhaps one of the most unlikely philosophers in history. Marcus was not a man who sat in quiet gardens contemplating abstract ideas. He was not hidden away in libraries or ivory towers. He led armies, passed laws, managed crises, and endured enormous personal hardship. And yet, in the midst of this turmoil, he turned inward. Night after night, in moments stolen from duty and battle, he wrote, not to impress anyone, not to be remembered, but simply to remind himself of how to stay sane in a world that seemed determined to test his strength at every turn. These private reflections would eventually become Meditations, a book that has survived 2,000 years, not because it was meant to, but because truth has a way of lasting. At the heart of his writings lies a simple but radical idea: focus only on what you can control. In a world so full of uncertainty, Marcus saw that the only reliable compass we have is our own mind, our judgments, our choices, and our responses. Everything else, no matter how important it may seem, is like the weather. You can't stop the rain from falling, but you can decide how to walk through it. He knew he couldn't stop the wars or the plagues or the betrayals, but he could choose how to think, how to act, how to carry himself. That, he believed, was where real strength lived. This way of thinking comes from Stoicism, a philosophy that began in ancient Greece but found new life in the chaos of the Roman Empire. It does not promise peace or wealth or even happiness in the way we often understand it today. Instead, Stoicism teaches endurance. It teaches clarity. It teaches that while we cannot shape the world, we can always shape ourselves. Marcus's message was not to retreat from life, but to engage with it fully, with open eyes and a steady heart. He urged himself, and by extension all of us, not to be blown about by the winds of public opinion or the pursuit of fame. If someone spoke badly of him, he reminded himself, that is their opinion. If fortune turned against him, he wrote, "You were never promised a life without pain." He didn't waste time wishing for different circumstances. He focused instead on being the kind of person who could meet any circumstance with dignity. In today's world, these lessons feel more relevant than ever. We live in an age of constant comparison, where social media bombards us with filtered lives and curated perfection. It's easy to believe that our worth depends on how others see us, how many likes we get, how successful we appear, how much we can prove. But Marcus Aurelius, writing by candlelight in his army tent, reminds us that none of that really matters. What matters is whether we are kind when it's hard, honest when it's tempting to lie, calm when everything around us is chaotic. Think about the last time you felt anxious or insecure. Chances are it had something to do with something outside your control, a comment someone made, a missed opportunity, a fear of not measuring up. Stoicism invites us to gently let go of that noise. It doesn't mean we stop caring or that we become cold or detached. It means we learn to care wisely, to invest our energy into things that we can actually influence: our effort, our principles, our presence in the moment. For Marcus, this wasn't just theory, it was survival. He didn't write Meditations as a wise man preaching from a place of comfort. He wrote it as a tired, often heartbroken leader trying to hold himself together. His writings are full of doubts, questions, and small pep talks to himself. And in that vulnerability, we find his strength. He never pretended to have all the answers. He simply kept coming back to the same truth. You are not in control of the world, but you are in control of yourself. That truth can be both humbling and empowering. We can't stop change. We can't avoid loss, but we can choose how to meet each day. We can remind ourselves that every challenge is also an invitation, a chance to respond with courage, with patience, with grace. And perhaps that's why Marcus's voice still echoes across centuries. In a world that often feels just as unstable and uncertain as his, we can still sit with his words, breathe a little deeper, and remember, you don't have to chase approval or fear the future or be perfect. You just have to show up, fully, honestly, and with the quiet conviction that your character is the one thing no one can take from you. In a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming, where stress comes from every direction and peace of mind seems like a rare luxury, one ancient philosophy continues to offer calm amidst the storm: Stoicism. Born over 2,300 years ago in ancient Greece through the teachings of Zeno of Citium, Stoicism was never meant to suppress emotions or turn people into emotionless statues. Instead, it aimed to cultivate inner strength, clarity of thought, and emotional stability. At its heart, Stoicism teaches that true happiness does not come from pleasure, success, or any external condition. It comes from inner peace and moral character. Stoics believe that while we cannot control everything that happens around us, like illness, the loss of a job, or someone else's opinion, we can always control how we respond to it. This idea may sound simple, but it carries powerful implications. Imagine waking up to bad news, a rejection letter, a betrayal, or a sudden setback. In moments like these, our instincts might push us toward frustration or despair. But Stoicism offers a different path. It invites us to pause, to take a deep breath, and to ask, is this within my control? If the answer is no, then there's no use in clinging to the pain. Instead, focus on what you can influence: your attitude, your choices, and the meaning you give to the moment. No one embodied this mindset more profoundly than Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled during some of the most difficult times in the empire's history. War, plague, political betrayal, he faced them all. Yet through it, he kept a personal journal, not for fame or glory, but as a way to guide himself. That journal later became known as Meditations, a timeless work of wisdom still read and loved today. It is in Meditations that Marcus reflects on how to live a meaningful life in the face of pain and uncertainty. His writings remind us that strength is not found in controlling the world, but in mastering ourselves. One of the most important ideas in Stoicism is this distinction between what we can control and what we cannot. When we worry about things beyond our reach, like how others view us, or whether we succeed or fail at something, we often fall into anxiety and frustration. But if we shift our focus to what lies within our power, our thoughts, our actions, our values, then we regain a sense of peace. For example, if someone criticizes you unfairly, Stoicism encourages you not to be consumed by anger. Instead, you might ask yourself, is their opinion something I can change? If not, why waste energy fighting it? You can choose to remain calm, to listen objectively, or even to ignore it if it has no real value. That choice, that control, is where your strength lies. In the modern world, Stoicism has found new life. With the rise of social media, endless comparisons, and the pressure to constantly prove ourselves, many people find themselves anxious, disconnected, and insecure. Stoicism offers tools that are surprisingly modern in their usefulness. Practices like questioning your negative thoughts, reminding yourself of what truly matters, or expressing gratitude each day have become common in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, a widely used psychological treatment. That's because Stoicism and CBT share the same goal, helping people shift their thinking and take back control over their emotional life. Consider the stress many people feel before an important test, a job interview, or a big presentation. Often, our minds race with what-if scenarios. What if I fail? What if I say something wrong? What if I'm not good enough? Stoicism teaches us to gently pull our focus back to what we can do. Prepare as best we can, show up with honesty and effort, and accept the outcome without fear. Because in the end, we don't control the results, but we do control the effort we bring to the moment. What makes Stoicism powerful is its quiet confidence in the human spirit. It doesn't promise a life without pain or trouble. Rather, it shows us how to face those difficulties with dignity and grace. It teaches that suffering often comes not from events themselves, but from the way we interpret them. A delay at the airport is just a delay, until we decide it's a disaster. A lost opportunity is just a change of path, until we label it a failure. Stoicism invites us to look deeper, to notice these mental habits, and to choose a better way of seeing. And in doing so, Stoicism does not make us cold or distant. Quite the opposite. It helps us become more present, more understanding, and more resilient. By focusing on what we can control, we learn to let go of what we can't. By accepting life as it is, rather than how we wish it to be, we find a surprising kind of freedom. In our age of noise and distraction, Stoicism offers silence and focus. In a culture that chases constant stimulation, it offers stillness. And in a society that often confuses success with self-worth, Stoicism reminds us that the only thing truly in our power is our character. Maybe that's why, more than 2 millennia later, we still turn to Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca. Their words have not faded because their message is timeless. You cannot control the world, but you can control your mind. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. In a world where emotions run high and validation is constantly sought after, the idea of detachment often gets misunderstood. Many people hear the word and immediately imagine coldness, emotional distance, or even selfishness. But in the Stoic tradition, detachment, or what might be better called healthy separation, is not about shutting down emotionally or cutting yourself off from others. It is about creating a strong inner foundation, one that isn't swayed by the unpredictable nature of the world outside. At its core, Stoic detachment is a deep commitment to peace of mind, self-respect, and clarity. It is about not placing your sense of worth in the hands of others and not tying your happiness to things you cannot control. The Stoics, especially Marcus Aurelius, were clear on this point. They warned that when we base our sense of self on external approval, on praise, recognition, popularity, we set ourselves up for suffering. This isn't just a philosophical idea. It's something most of us experience in daily life. Think of the anxious energy that bubbles up when waiting for likes on a photo, or the sting that comes from being overlooked at work. If your self-worth rises and falls with every comment, compliment, or criticism, then your inner world becomes a stormy sea, never still, never calm. True detachment does not mean you don't care. In fact, it often means you care more deeply, but from a place of stability rather than need. It is the difference between loving someone and needing them to act a certain way in order for you to feel okay. When you practice Stoic detachment, you can fully love, support, and be present for others, but without losing yourself in the process. You don't become less compassionate, you become less dependent, and that makes your compassion stronger, more grounded, and more real. Imagine someone you care about begins to withdraw or criticize you. Without stoic detachment, your instinct might be to panic, to chase their approval, or to take every word they say as a personal attack. But with a healthy sense of separation, you can pause. You can listen to their words and ask yourself calmly, is there something valuable here? Is this criticism a mirror showing something I hadn't seen before? If it is, you can grow from it. If it's not, you can let it pass, without anger, without defense, without letting it poison your peace. This mindset also applies to success and failure. The Stoics teach that you can and should put effort into what you do, whether it's your career, your relationships, or your creative projects. But once you've done your part, the outcome isn't yours to control. If your happiness depends entirely on success, praise, or external reward, then you are not truly free. But if you've learned to detach from the outcome, knowing that your worth lies in your effort and your integrity, you can move through life with far greater resilience and confidence. There is an immense strength in this way of living. It allows you to remain calm in the face of chaos, generous in the face of ingratitude, and kind even when others are cruel. You're not being walked over. You're simply not choosing to let others dictate your emotional weather. You know who you are, and you know that no passing judgment can define your value. That inner stillness is not passivity, it's power. What Marcus Aurelius offers us is a reminder that we have more agency than we think. We cannot always change the world, but we can always shape how we relate to it. We can step back from the tug of war of needing to be seen, heard, or applauded, and instead find meaning in doing what feels right and just, regardless of how others respond. This form of detachment is especially important in the age we live in. With social media, endless news cycles, and constant exposure to others' lives and opinions, it's easy to be swept into a current of comparison and self-doubt. Every scroll can feel like a silent judgment. Am I enough? Am I doing well? Am I being liked, seen, appreciated? Stoic detachment invites you to step out of that current and plant your feet firmly on the shore. It reminds you that your value is not a number on a screen, not a reaction, not a trend. It is steady, silent, and deep within you. Of course, this kind of detachment takes time. It's a practice, not a switch. There will still be moments when you crave approval or feel stung by rejection. That's human. But with awareness and intention, you can begin to notice those patterns, soften them, and choose differently. You can remind yourself that your peace is not something others can give or take. It's something you protect and nourish from within. Ultimately, the Stoic path is not about building walls, but about growing roots. It's not about pushing people away, but about standing so firmly in your own inner truth that you no longer need others to complete you. You become more available to love, more able to serve, and more open to life. Not because you are unaffected, but because you are anchored. So the next time someone praises you, you can smile and feel grateful, but you don't cling to it. When someone criticizes you, you can pause, reflect, and let go. And through it all, you remain steady, not distant, but centered. That is the quiet strength of Stoic detachment. It is not coldness, it is freedom. In the quiet depths of ancient thought, Marcus Aurelius offers a powerful and timeless insight. True strength does not come from the outside world, but from within. The world may swirl around us with chaos, uncertainty, and unexpected turns, but the mind, when trained with care, can become a fortress untouched by the storm. Marcus believed that the mind is the only domain truly under our control. As he once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." These words are not simply poetic. They serve as a foundation for how we might build a deeper kind of strength, one that doesn't rely on circumstance, fortune, or even comfort. To develop mental strength, Marcus didn't encourage us to deny pain or pretend difficulties don't exist. Instead, he pointed us toward a different path, one that asks us to pause, to observe, and to choose our response with clarity. Life will bring disappointment. People will criticize. Failures will sting. But none of these things have the power to define us unless we give them permission to. And that, Marcus says, is the essence of strength, not in avoiding life's challenges, but in responding to them with calmness and reason. Imagine losing a job, facing rejection, or watching something important slip away. The natural reaction is fear or sadness, even anger. But Marcus invites us to go beyond the first wave of emotion. He teaches that every obstacle carries within it a seed of opportunity. Not necessarily the kind of opportunity we wanted, but the kind that helps us grow. When we're faced with difficulty, we're given a chance to sharpen our patience, practice humility, and develop courage. These aren't traits we're born with. They're cultivated through hardship. Take, for example, the experience of failure. It's easy to see it as a sign that we're not good enough. But what if we looked at it differently? What if, instead of labeling ourselves as failures, we saw the setback as a kind of training? Marcus saw life as a continuous practice, like a soldier sharpening his sword, not for a specific battle, but for life itself. In this way, every criticism becomes a lesson in grace. Every closed door becomes a moment to practice acceptance. The Stoic way is not to resist the path we're on, but to walk it with wisdom, even when the road is hard. This way of living requires what Marcus called Stoic acceptance. It is not the same as giving up. It is not apathy or resignation. Rather, it is a gentle but powerful act of understanding. We cannot change the past. We cannot always choose what happens to us, but we can choose how we meet the present moment. When something difficult occurs, an illness, a betrayal, a sudden change, we can waste energy wishing it hadn't happened, or we can acknowledge what is and begin to act from there. Marcus puts it simply, do not wish for things to happen as you want, but wish for them to happen as they do, and you will find peace. This perspective creates space between the event and our reaction. It gives us time to breathe, time to ask, what is in my control right now? That one question can change everything. Because it reminds us that even when everything else feels uncertain, we still have power over our thoughts, our choices, and our attitude. In this sense, mental strength is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet. It is still. It is the ability to remain centered when the world outside tries to pull you in every direction. Marcus did not live in ease or luxury, despite being an emperor. His reign was filled with war, political tension, loss, and illness. But his writings show us that he didn't let those outer circumstances harden his heart or cloud his mind. Instead, he turned inward and cultivated a calm that wasn't dependent on victory or approval. He understood that control is limited to one space, the mind. That's where real power lives. To build this kind of strength, we must begin each day with a simple reminder. Much of life is outside our control, but how we show up, how we think, how we speak, how we respond, is always ours. Mental strength is not about becoming unbreakable. It's about becoming flexible enough to bend without falling, resilient enough to rise again, and wise enough to choose peace over panic. In the end, Marcus Aurelius offers a quiet revolution, not against the world, but against the ways we let it rule us. He reminds us that we are not prisoners of circumstance. We are the authors of our response. And in that space between what happens and how we react, we have the power to build something unshakable, the strength of the soul. The 4 practical practices of Stoicism. Stoicism, as practiced by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, was never just a philosophy to read about or discuss in grand halls. It was a daily discipline. For Marcus, wisdom wasn't some distant ideal. It was a living, breathing force that guided how he faced each sunrise, each challenge, each fleeting moment of life. He didn't simply write philosophical notes in his journal to impress posterity. He wrote to remind himself, to return again and again to the core of Stoic thought. Control what you can, release what you can't, and cultivate a mind that remains steady in the middle of the storm. But how does one do that? Especially in our own world, where the storms may look different, but the struggle remains the same? There are 4 practices inspired by Marcus's writings that you can start right now. They are not dramatic or mystical. They do not require hours of study or perfect conditions. What they need is sincerity, consistency, and a quiet willingness to look inward. The first practice is to separate what is within your control from what is not. This may sound simple, but its depth is profound. Most of our anxiety, frustration, and restlessness comes from trying to control the uncontrollable, other people's opinions, random events, even the past. Stoicism offers a sharp tool for cutting through this mental chaos. When you face a difficult situation, pause and ask yourself, what part of this do I truly control? For example, If you're walking into a difficult exam or a tense conversation, you can't control the questions or the other person's behavior, but you can control your preparation, your attitude, your effort, your values. And by directing your energy only toward these internal elements, you begin to calm the waters of the mind. You start to realize that serenity doesn't come from things going your way. It comes from you being okay even when they don't. The second practice is keeping a daily journal. Not the kind filled with lofty goals or perfect paragraphs, but a quiet space to unpack your thoughts. Each evening or morning, spend a few minutes reflecting on your day. What did you feel? When did you get upset? What did you handle well? Writing about your reactions allows you to see them more clearly. Patterns emerge. You might notice that certain things always push your buttons. You might see how you overreacted to something small, or how you remained calm during something big. The journal becomes a mirror, not of the face, but of the inner world, the thoughts, assumptions, and stories you tell yourself. And when you look closely, you begin to rewrite those stories with more awareness, more balance. You begin to choose your responses rather than be ruled by them. In Marcus's own meditations, we see this process unfold. He speaks directly to himself with humility and honesty. That same habit is available to anyone willing to pick up a pen and listen within. The third practice is negative visualization. It sounds counterintuitive. Why would someone intentionally imagine something bad happening? But this practice, ancient and powerful, is not about inviting misfortune. It's about building perspective. Once in a while, take a quiet moment to imagine losing something you now take for granted. Your job, your health, a relationship, even your own life. Not to scare yourself, but to awaken gratitude. Too often, we race through our days chasing what's next, unaware of how much we already have. By gently picturing what life would be like without certain comforts or blessings, we begin to appreciate them more deeply. We stop seeing them as normal and start seeing them as gifts. And if loss does come, as it eventually will, our minds will not be as shocked. We will have practiced. We will have grown the inner resilience to say, I knew this was possible. I am ready. The fourth practice is the voluntary embrace of small discomforts. This is not about punishing yourself or proving anything. It is a quiet way of reminding your body and mind that comfort is not the goal of life. From time to time, deliberately choose to step outside your comfort zone in simple ways. Take a cold shower instead of a warm one. Skip dessert even if you crave it. Leave your phone behind during a walk. Sleep on the floor for a night. These small acts might seem insignificant, but their effect accumulates. They train you to endure. They whisper a quiet truth. You are stronger than you think. When you learn to do without pleasure or ease, you discover that happiness does not come from comfort alone. It comes from self-control, from freedom, from knowing that you are not a slave to every desire or fear. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the body can endure more than the mind thinks. Through discomfort, we reconnect with that forgotten strength. Together, these four practices, discerning control, daily journaling, visualizing loss, and choosing discomfort, form a foundation. They are not rigid rules, but gentle anchors. They help you stay centered when the world feels chaotic. They don't promise perfection. They don't shield you from sadness or failure. But they do offer something better: the ability to face life with clarity, composure, and quiet courage. Marcus Aurelius lived centuries ago, in a time without smartphones or modern anxiety. Yet his struggles were not so different from ours. He too battled self-doubt, frustration, sorrow, and through Stoicism, he carved a path, not away from pain, but through it. He showed that strength of character is not born in comfort, but forged in honesty, reflection, and the daily choice to live with intention. We can walk that path too. One question, one journal entry, one quiet act of discipline at a time. In the quiet chambers of his thoughts, Marcus Aurelius reflected deeply on how to live with others. For him, Stoicism was not just a personal practice. It was a way to navigate the complex and often turbulent waters of human relationships. He believed that to maintain peace within, one must approach relationships with both care and detachment. It may sound like a contradiction at first, to care deeply and yet remain emotionally independent, but in truth, this balance is the key to harmony with others and with oneself. To care deeply means to act with compassion, to treat others with respect, and to wish them well. But Marcus reminds us that this care must not turn into emotional dependence. When we place our happiness entirely in the hands of another person, whether a partner, a friend, or a family member, we make ourselves vulnerable to their moods, their mistakes, and their unpredictability. We suffer not because they harm us, but because we expected them not to. True strength, according to Stoicism, comes from expecting people to act according to their nature, not according to our desires. This perspective becomes especially powerful when dealing with those who treat us poorly. Marcus observed that many people act out of ignorance, fear, or pain. A rude comment, a cold shoulder, or an act of betrayal often reflects more about the other person's inner turmoil than about our own worth. Instead of responding with anger or bitterness, he suggested we pause and remember. This is not personal. It is not a verdict on who we are. It is a mirror held up to someone else's struggles. In one of his writings, Marcus urges himself and us not to let others steal our peace. The best revenge, he wrote, is not to be like your enemy. These words are simple, yet profound. When we are wronged, our natural instinct may be to retaliate, to strike back, or at least to hold a grudge. But doing so only ties us to the very pain we wish to escape. It lowers us to the level of those who hurt us. Forgiveness, then, is not an act of weakness, but one of immense inner power. It frees us from the toxic cycle of resentment and preserves our inner calm. Marcus also taught that not every criticism deserves a reaction. When someone speaks ill of us or challenges our character, our first impulse may be to defend ourselves. But the Stoic path is different. First, we examine the criticism honestly. Is there truth in it? If so, we accept it and use it to improve. If not, we let it pass like a breeze that touches the surface but never sinks in. Why should we be wounded by words that do not reflect reality? Why let a false judgment define our day or our sense of self? This calm and reasoned approach requires practice. It means learning to pause before reacting, to take a breath when our emotions flare, to remember that our peace is ours to protect. And perhaps most importantly, it means letting go of the idea that others must behave in ways that make us feel comfortable. People will lie, disappoint, forget, and sometimes hurt us. That is the nature of life. But we do not have to carry every wound they offer. We can choose to walk away lighter, not heavier. Marcus Aurelius viewed life as a shared journey, where each soul carries its own burden, its own confusion, its own longing for meaning. If someone lashes out, perhaps they are tired. If someone betrays you, perhaps they are lost. This does not excuse their actions, but it explains them. And in that understanding, we find a space for compassion, not the kind that enables harmful behavior, but the kind that allows us to stay kind without being naive. He encouraged us to be like the rock that the waves crash against, unshaken and unmoved. Not because we are cold, but because we are rooted. Not because we don't feel, but because we choose which feelings deserve our energy. In relationships, this means showing up with love and presence, but not losing ourselves in the process. It means being generous with our kindness, but stingy with our peace. There's also a quiet dignity in not needing to win every argument, to prove every point, or to demand apology from every person who wrongs us. Marcus would suggest that if someone misunderstands you and you've done your part to clarify, then let it rest. The opinions of others are not chains unless we agree to wear them. And the freedom that comes with detachment is not cold. It's warm because it gives space for others to be who they are and for us to remain whole regardless. In the end, relationships, like all things, are temporary. People come and go, hearts open and close. But the way we carry ourselves in these ever-changing dynamics, that is what matters. Marcus taught that the soul finds peace not in perfect relationships, but in right action. Speak truthfully, act kindly, forgive quickly, expect nothing but remain open. And always, always return to the stillness inside when the world outside begins to stir too loudly. This is Stoicism in relationships, not a retreat from emotion, but a return to clarity. Not the absence of love, but the refusal to make love into a chain. It is, in the end, the art of being both soft and strong, tender yet unshakable, fully human and fully free. In the quiet search for a meaningful life, many of us find ourselves pulled in opposite directions. one toward the thrill of instant gratification and the other toward a deeper, slower kind of happiness. It's tempting to believe that happiness lies in indulgence, in the next adventure, the next purchase, or the next high. But the kind of happiness that lasts, the kind that brings peace rather than restlessness, often comes from something quieter, more grounded. This idea isn't new. Long before the noise of modern life, thinkers like Aristotle and Epicurus explored what it means to live well. They saw happiness not as a constant chase for pleasure, but as the result of balance, purpose, and connection. Aristotle used the word eudaimonia to describe a form of flourishing, a life where one's actions are in harmony with their values, where virtue guides decisions, and where fulfillment comes not from fleeting excitement, but from becoming who one truly is. For him, happiness was a byproduct of living well, not a goal to be seized in moments of pleasure. Epicurus, on the other hand, is often misunderstood. People think he preached a life of luxury and indulgence, but in truth, his teachings were simple and clear. He believed that the greatest pleasures were often the simplest ones: a shared meal with a dear friend, the shade of a tree on a hot day, or a moment of peace after a storm. To him, avoiding pain and cultivating tranquility was more important than chasing intense highs. It was about appreciating enough, not always wanting more. Today, modern psychology echoes many of these ancient truths. We now know through countless studies that sustainable happiness doesn't come from more money, more things, or even more success. It comes from meaning. People who build their lives around a deeper sense of purpose, whether through creative work, helping others, or growing as a person, report higher levels of well-being. This kind of happiness is rooted in the long term. It asks for patience. It grows slowly, like a tree rather than a firework. Another key to lasting happiness is presence, the ability to be fully in the moment without judgment or distraction. This is where mindfulness enters the picture. Mindfulness isn't about escaping the world, but rather returning to it, moment by moment, with open eyes and an open heart. When we practice mindfulness, we allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling, to breathe through tension, to witness thoughts without being controlled by them. In doing so, we create space for calm, for clarity, and for gratitude. Mindfulness doesn't solve every problem, but it changes how we meet them. Instead of reacting from fear or habit, we respond with awareness. And in that awareness, happiness often arises. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but like a quiet light spreading across the floor in the morning. At the center of all this is connection. No matter how independent we may be, humans are built for belonging. Time and again, research shows that deep, meaningful relationships are among the most reliable sources of happiness. It's not about the number of friends we have, or how often we go out, but about the depth of our bonds, the feeling that someone sees us, understands us, and cares. Whether it's the quiet companionship of a partner, the laughter of close friends, or the comforting routine of family, relationships ground us. They remind us we're not alone, and that our lives matter to others. Even small acts of kindness, listening with attention, offering help, or simply showing up, can deepen these bonds and make life richer. Material success and personal comfort are not enemies of happiness, but when they become the focus, we often lose our way. True balance lies in knowing when to pursue, when to pause, and when to let go. It means recognizing the difference between desire and need, between noise and meaning. Sometimes the most radical act of happiness is choosing simplicity over complexity, stillness over speed, and connection over distraction. And in doing so, we may discover that happiness was never really something to chase. It was something to return to. The world around us is fast and full of pressure, but we don't have to live caught in its current. By turning inward, slowing down, and honoring what truly matters, we can find a happiness that doesn't burn out. It doesn't have to be perfect. It only has to be real. A shared laugh, a deep breath, a quiet evening with someone we love. These are the moments that build a life not just worth living, but worth cherishing. And in the end, perhaps that's the happiness we've been searching for all along. Living urgently, living peacefully. To live urgently does not mean to rush, to panic, or to drown in a whirlwind of activity. It is not the frantic ticking of a clock that drives us forward, nor is it the fear of running out of time. Living urgently is something quieter, deeper. It is the conscious decision to be present, to live each moment with full awareness and intent. Each morning, before the world has fully woken, you ask yourself a question that cuts through the noise. If today were my last day, how would I want to live it? You don't ask to scare yourself or to dramatize life. You ask because the question roots you back into what truly matters. You take a pen, write down the answer. Not a grand plan, but a few clear thoughts. And in that act, you begin to choose the kind of life you want, moment by moment. In a world that pulls us in every direction, it is easy to live by default. Notifications ping, demands pile up, and soon we're just reacting, surviving, not living. But urgency in its truest form is not reaction. It is action, grounded in clarity. It is knowing that time is limited and therefore sacred. When you live urgently, you don't waste time pretending. You don't say yes to things that drain you just to be polite. You don't let old wounds define your current self. You begin to notice how precious your attention is, and you stop giving it away to things that offer no return to your spirit. There is a stillness that comes with this kind of urgency. It's not the loud kind of ambition the world often applauds. It's quieter. It shows up in the way you sit with someone and actually listen. In the way you take a walk, not to get somewhere, but to feel the air, to hear your own thoughts. It's in how you breathe more slowly, not because you're idle, but because you're finally aligned. Living urgently is not the opposite of peace. It is the doorway to it. When you stop wasting time on things that don't belong in your life, what remains is space. And in that space, peace begins to grow. Part of this journey requires letting go. You will feel the pull to hold on, to habits that once comforted you, to relationships that no longer nurture you, to stories you keep telling yourself out of fear. But real urgency does not allow clutter to take up your precious days. You will learn, with time and practice, to release what weighs you down. Not with resentment, but with softness. You will see that not everything or everyone needs to be carried into your next chapter. And that is not loss. It is liberation. This is not about perfection. You will still forget, still fall into distraction, still have days when everything feels blurry. But the more you return to that quiet question each morning, the more your life begins to shape itself around what matters. You will find yourself drawn to depth over noise, to meaning over performance, to connection over convenience. You will prioritize the people who see you, the work that moves you, and the silence that reminds you who you are when the world is not watching. Urgency gives your life edge, clarity, and rhythm. Peace gives it depth, softness, and meaning. You do not have to choose one or the other. You can move with intention and still breathe slowly. You can set goals and still savor the moment. You can carry ambition in one hand and gratitude in the other. This is not a race, but it is a calling to stop living like you have forever and to start living like each moment counts, because it does. And so you wake up again tomorrow, not in panic, but in presence. You look at your list, and before doing anything, you pause. You ask, what will truly matter by the time the sun sets? You remember that life is not about how much you do, but how deeply you live. And that kind of life begins not with grand declarations, but with the quiet choice to live urgently, and to do so with peace in your heart. Memento Mori, remember that you will die. Memento Mori, a quiet whisper that travels through the centuries. Remember that you will die. At first, the phrase may sound grim, almost chilling, but its purpose is not to frighten, it is to awaken, to stir something deep inside you that may have fallen asleep in the rhythm of daily life. It is not about death, it is about life. It is a reminder, not of the end, but of the urgency to begin truly living. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, once wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." He wasn't trying to be dramatic. He was urging clarity. If you knew that your time was limited, would you still argue over the small things? Would you still scroll endlessly, chase approval, or drown in anxiety over things that don't matter? Or would you pause, breathe deeper, listen more, love better, and live more honestly? To remember death is to remember what's precious. When we forget our own mortality, we slip into autopilot. We act as though we have forever. We put off the conversation, the forgiveness, the dream, the joy. We say, not now, later. But Memento Mori interrupts that. It holds your gaze and says, there may be no later. And somehow, strangely, this brings peace. Because when you accept that life ends, you stop wasting it. Across cultures and centuries, the awareness of death has served not as a source of dread, but as a compass. The Stoics didn't meditate on death to fall into despair. They did it to cut through distraction. They believed that if you carry the knowledge of death with you, then your choices become sharper. Your words weigh more. Your time becomes sacred. You learn to let go of things that were never worth holding on to in the first place. In Buddhism, the idea of anicca, impermanence, reminds us that everything is in flux. Nothing stays the same. No emotion, no possession, no relationship, no version of ourselves is fixed. Everything shifts, fades, renews, and eventually disappears. And so, to cling is to suffer. To accept is to be free. When you realize that everything, including your own life, is temporary, you stop gripping so tightly. You start appreciating things not for how long they last, but for the beauty they carry in this very moment. Japanese samurai once practiced the art of dying daily. They imagined each morning that it might be their last. This wasn't dark or depressing. It brought them clarity and courage. If today was the only day you had, would you live it differently? Would you be more present? Would you look your loved ones in the eye and say what you've been meaning to say? The samurai believed that this daily remembrance gave them the strength to act without hesitation, to move with integrity, and to live with dignity. Existential philosophers, too, have reflected on death not as a void, but as a mirror. Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus explored what it means to live in a world where nothing is promised. Camus spoke of the absurd, the strange tension between our desire for meaning and the silence of the universe. And yet, he didn't collapse into nihilism. Instead, he urged us to revolt, not in rebellion, but in spirit, to make meaning anyway, to live authentically, knowing that time is short. That, in fact, is what makes it matter. There is something grounding, even soothing, about accepting death. It puts things in proportion. That argument you had, that deadline you missed, that embarrassing moment from last week, none of it seems as heavy in the light of the bigger picture. Death is the great equalizer, yes, but also the great simplifier. It strips away the noise. It asks you, what is really worth your attention, your energy, your heart? One of the most powerful practices you can do is simply sit with the idea of your own ending. Not in a fearful way, but in a quiet, reflective one. Imagine your last day, not the dramatic version, just you at the end of your time. What do you see? Who is with you? What remains unfinished? What are you proud of? What do you wish you had done differently? This meditation is not meant to make you sad. It is meant to realign you, to gently point your life back toward what matters most. When you live with death in your pocket, not as a burden but as a quiet companion, you tend to live more fully. You say yes to more sunsets. You forgive faster. You laugh easier. You say I love you without waiting for the perfect moment. You stop trying to control everything. You start letting life flow. You live with a kind of softness, not because you are weak, but because you understand how fragile everything is. So Memento Mori is not a sentence. It is a gift, a sacred nudge to live wide awake, to not sleepwalk through your days, to look at life not just as a sequence of tasks, but as a miracle happening in real time. Death is not the enemy of life. It is what gives life its shape, its urgency, its brilliance. Let it remind you that this moment, this breath, this glance, this word, is already a piece. If you truly understood that your time here was limited, what would you do differently? It's a haunting yet liberating question. Death, the very thing we spend most of our lives avoiding, hiding from, or denying, often holds the greatest lessons about how to live. The stories of people like Steve Jobs and Viktor Frankl remind us that looking death in the eye doesn't have to be terrifying. It can be clarifying. It can strip away all the noise, the expectations, and the fears, leaving behind only what truly matters. Steve Jobs once said that remembering he would die soon was the most important tool he had ever encountered to help him make the big choices in life. Knowing that everything, including pride, fear, and embarrassment, would fall away in the face of death, helped him focus on what truly mattered. That awareness gave him the courage to follow his intuition, even when it led him off the well-worn path. Death, for him, was not something to dread, but a kind of compass pointing toward authenticity. Viktor Frankl, on the other hand, lived through the unimaginable. In the midst of a concentration camp, surrounded by suffering and the constant presence of death, he came to a powerful realization. The deepest human drive is not pleasure or power, but meaning. Even when everything is taken from us, our freedom, our dignity, our comfort, if we still hold on to a purpose, we can endure almost anything. Frankl found that those who survived the camps were often those who had someone to live for, or something unfinished they still felt compelled to do. In the darkest places, he discovered the light of meaning. These are not just stories of extraordinary men. These are reflections of something universal, something we all feel in quiet moments, the ticking of time. And when we pause long enough to hear it, to really listen, something inside us shifts. Try asking yourself, sincerely, what if I only had a year left to live? What would I finally say out loud? Who would I call today instead of someday? What projects would I begin? What dreams would I stop putting off for a later that might never come? Maybe you would forgive someone you've kept at a distance for too long. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Maybe you would stop delaying that trip you've always wanted to take. Not because the location is magical, but because it represents freedom, courage, the act of choosing joy. Maybe you'd write that letter, share that idea, quit that job, start that painting, or simply sit with someone you love without rushing. The point is not to panic or chase a bucket list. It's not about doing more. It's about living more deeply, more honestly, more in alignment with what makes you feel alive. You don't need a diagnosis or a tragedy to wake up. You don't need a near-death experience to start truly living. You just need to remember that you don't have forever, and that's okay. In fact, that's what gives life its flavor. When we forget our mortality, we tend to get lost in the trivial. We argue about things that won't matter in a week. We seek approval from people we don't even like. We chase money at the cost of our health. We wait for perfect moments that never arrive. But when we bring death into view, not as a threat, but as a reminder, it helps us see through the illusions. Death doesn't need to be the enemy. It can be a gentle guide, constantly whispering, "Don't waste this." It tells you to cherish your morning coffee, to look up at the sky more often, to say the kind words while there's still time. It urges you to stop waiting for the right moment to begin being yourself. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that we are not alone. Every human who has ever lived has had to grapple with this same truth. The finality of life doesn't isolate us, it connects us. It makes our joys more precious, our connections more sacred. When you understand that every goodbye could be the last, you hug tighter, listen longer, love more openly. You don't need a countdown to start changing how you live. You only need to look inward and ask, what am I pretending not to know? What am I afraid to admit I truly want? What would I do if I didn't have time to be afraid? Because here's the truth, you don't. You don't have time to waste in fear. You don't have time to postpone your real life until the stars align. Life is happening now, in this very breath. Every second is an opportunity to begin again. So ask the questions, live the answers, forgive, create. Speak your truth, choose love over comfort. Let the reality of your mortality set you free, not someday, but now. In the quiet moments of reflection, when the world slows down and we are left alone with our thoughts, the wisdom of ancient philosophers like Marcus Aurelius whispers to us across time. His teachings, though born in the heart of the Roman Empire, still echo with astonishing clarity in our modern world. They remind us of something we often forget in the rush of daily life, that true happiness, true strength, does not come from what surrounds us, but from what lies within us. It is easy to believe that our peace depends on the actions of others, on luck, on the praise we receive, or the success we chase. But Marcus Aurelius gently shifts our gaze inward. He encourages us to stop measuring our lives by what we cannot control, and to begin focusing on what we can, our thoughts, our choices, our reactions. The storms outside may rage, but we are not the storm. We are the steady flame that does not flicker, even when the wind howls. There is a deep sense of calm in accepting reality for what it is. Not resignation, but a quiet strength that comes from facing life without illusion. Marcus taught that we suffer more in our imagination than in reality. When we resist what is, we create unnecessary pain. But when we align ourselves with the truth of the moment, however difficult, it becomes easier to move forward with grace. Acceptance does not mean giving up. It means seeing clearly so we can act wisely. And within this philosophy lies a profound awareness of time, not as something to fear, but as something to cherish. Time is not infinite. We are not promised tomorrow. And in that truth lies both a burden and a gift. When you understand that each breath is a miracle, each sunrise a blessing, life becomes less about postponing happiness and more about being fully awake to the present. This awareness sharpens our sense of purpose. It makes ordinary moments shimmer with meaning. We begin to ask ourselves, am I living in a way that truly matters? To live as if today were your last is not to live recklessly, nor is it to be gripped by anxiety. It is an invitation to slow down and truly see the world around you, to speak kindly, to listen deeply, to walk with your whole heart. It is about choosing presence over distraction, truth over performance. It is about doing the small things well, not for applause, but because they are part of the life you are building with intention. And when we live like this, conscious, grounded, honest, we begin to shape a life that we can look back on without regret. Not because it was perfect, not because we were flawless, but because it was real, because we tried, because we showed up. We begin to realize that fulfillment does not lie in escaping struggle, but in facing it with courage and compassion. That meaning is not something we find out there in the distance, but something we create with each choice, each act of care, each moment of awareness. This is the legacy of Stoic thought. Not cold, not detached, but full of quiet fire. A call to return to ourselves. A call to live deeply and truthfully in a world that so often pulls us away from what matters most. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough.